Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
You ever have one of those moments that burns itself so deep into your memory, you can feel the air in the room every time you think about it? I remember exactly how that office smelled. Coffee that had been left too long on the burner, cheap perfume from the receptionist's desk, the faint chemical stink from the printer behind me. But most of all, I remember his damn face. Rick Hendricks, Vice President of Sales, corporate golden boy, standing in front of my desk, waving my Super Bowl tickets in the air like they were some kind of prize he'd earned himself. He wasn't even subtle about it, he just smirked, a smug little curl of his mouth like he was doing me some kind of favor by acknowledging my disappointment. "I'll take these," he said, slipping the envelope into his suit jacket pocket like it was his God-given right. "I deserve them more than you anyway." That was the moment it happened. Not the moment he took the tickets, not really. The moment was quieter than that. It was the second I realized I wasn't going to scream, or cry, or storm into HR. No. I was going to smile, nod, and say 6 simple words that would change everything. "Have a great time, Rick," I said. And I meant it. But not the way he thought. You see, those tickets weren't just any tickets. They weren't just 2 slips of printed cardboard with a barcode. They were a symbol, a reward, a recognition of 18 months of blood, sweat, and quiet endurance. I'd worked late nights, skipped holidays, pushed sales numbers higher than anyone had in a decade. When the regional director announced the company would be awarding a pair of Super Bowl seats to the top performer of the year, I didn't even flinch. I already knew they were mine. Not in an arrogant way. I just knew the numbers didn't lie. I had crushed every goal they threw at me, even the ones they made up halfway through the quarter just to see if I'd falter. I didn't. I never do. But Rick, of course, couldn't stand that. He wasn't used to being outshined, especially not by someone like me, quiet, reliable Dana from accounts. I wasn't flashy, I didn't kiss ass at networking mixers, and I didn't pretend to laugh at his cheap jokes about interns and ex-wives. I was efficient, focused, and, apparently, threatening. And Rick, well, Rick was the kind of man who needed everything in the room to revolve around him, even if he hadn't earned a single ounce of it. It started small, like it always does. He'd take credit during meetings for reports I'd prepared. He'd invite me to pitch ideas and then repeat them louder like they were his. He'd forget to forward client updates, then tell everyone I was disorganized. All the while, he played the charming executive, smooth-talking, always in a crisp suit, the kind of man upper management loved because he looked like success, even if he couldn't spell half the industry terms he threw around. But taking the Super Bowl tickets, that was different. That wasn't just a petty office maneuver or a power play in a conference room. That was personal. He wanted me to feel small, irrelevant, erased. He wanted to remind me that no matter how hard I worked, he could still take whatever he wanted without consequence. And for a moment, just a flicker of a second, it almost worked. I felt that old familiar sting in the back of my throat, the kind that crawls up when you're about to cry but don't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it. But then something shifted in me. Something cold and precise. Because the thing Rick never understood about people like me is that we don't explode, we simmer. We calculate. We remember. And most of all, we wait. So I smiled. Not because I was okay. Not because I wanted him to feel comfortable. But because that smile was the first brick in the wall I was about to build around his entire damn career. A wall he wouldn't even see until it started closing in on him. He walked out of my office that afternoon humming some stupid tune, probably already fantasizing about his weekend, about the beer he'd drink and the bragging he'd do. And me? I went back to my computer and started typing like nothing had happened. But something had. He just didn't know it yet. What he didn't know was that his perfect little kingdom had just started crumbling. There's a certain kind of man who climbs the ladder by stepping on people like me, quiet, competent, invisible until we're useful. Rick was exactly that kind of man, and the higher he climbed, the more he believed he was born to be at the top, like the world owed him a corner office just for showing up in a tailored suit. But he wasn't clever, not really. He was loud, polished, and good at pretending he was important. The kind of guy who talks twice as much as he listens and remembers your name only when he needs something from you. And what he needed, almost constantly, was someone else to do his job for him. I spent years watching him operate like a magician without a trick, always making something appear from thin air while hiding the strings behind someone else's hands. Most people didn't see it, or maybe they chose not to. Because Rick was charming in that empty, plastic way that corporate America still mistakes for leadership. He slapped backs, shook hands, talked golf scores and whiskey brands, and sprinkled in buzzwords like he'd swallowed a quarterly earnings report whole. Meanwhile, I was the one crunching numbers at 10 o'clock at night, responding to clients in hotel lobbies between flights, fixing the errors he never admitted to making. And when I say he took credit, I don't mean in some vague, passive way. I mean he would stand in front of the regional board and present entire decks I'd built slide by slide, word by word, as if they had magically appeared in his inbox by divine intervention. He'd flash that salesman grin, toss in a few lines about his team, then soak up the praise like a sponge. Not once did he mention my name, not when the bonus checks rolled in, not when the department got commendations, not even when he was promoted. I was the engine under the hood, and he was the shiny paint job coasting down the freeway like he built the whole damn car himself. But you learn things when you stay quiet. You see details that loud people miss. You start to understand the rhythm of a man's lies, the way he covers a mistake, the way his eyes flicker when he's not sure if he's gotten away with something. I stopped hoping for recognition a long time ago. Instead, I started watching. I paid attention to the gaps between what he said and what actually happened. I noticed the small inconsistencies, the expenses that didn't quite line up, the reports that seemed a little too polished for the time he claimed he spent on them. And maybe that's why, when he took those Super Bowl tickets, something snapped differently in me. Not just because he stole something I'd earned, hell, I was used to that by now, but because he didn't even bother hiding the theft. He thought he could take from me openly, laugh about it to my face, and still walk away untouched. That's how far gone he was. That's how little he saw me, as a threat, as a person, as anything more than a workhorse that knew her place. Be honest, have you ever had a boss like Rick? One of those arrogant, entitled bastards who treats your effort like it's part of his salary package? A man who thinks your success is his reward, and your silence is his permission slip? A promotion, a project, a damn Super Bowl ticket. How many things have been taken from you just because someone else thought they deserved them more? Tell me in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one. I know some of you have swallowed your pride, smiled politely, and walked away with a burning in your gut that you couldn't shake for weeks. But I didn't walk away, not really. I smiled, sure. I nodded, I played along, I acted like the good little employee who doesn't make waves. But something had changed, something irreversible. And while Rick was out there planning his weekend at the game, I was planning something entirely different, something he wouldn't see coming until it was already too late. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I found it. He was out of the office, probably schmoozing some vendor over a steak lunch he'd expense later under the client entertainment category. I was walking past his office when I noticed his door wasn't shut all the way, just slightly ajar like an invitation. I never go into his space, not unless I'm sent. But something about that moment tugged at me, like the universe leaning in and whispering, "Go ahead, just look." I told myself it was harmless curiosity, just a glance, just a peek to see what the almighty Rick kept on his desk when no one was watching. I stepped inside, my heels silent on the carpet, my breath tight in my throat. His desk was a mess of papers and unopened mail, like always, but something caught my eye almost immediately, a small black notebook shoved halfway under a stack of folders. It was nothing fancy, just a cheap spiral-bound pad, the kind you get in bulk from the office supply closet. But it was marked with a single piece of red tape across the corner, handwritten in faded Sharpie, "Vendor contacts, do not discard." That's when I knew. That's when the shape of my plan began to form in my head, quiet and precise like a needle threading its way through silk. And Rick? He still thought I was just some tired woman behind a desk, still bitter about her tickets. He had no idea I'd just found the first domino. He had no idea what was coming next. The thing about men like Rick is they never think they'll get caught, because they build their little kingdoms on charm, connections, and just enough plausible deniability to make you doubt your own eyes. But every empire, no matter how carefully polished on the outside, has cracks if you know where to look, and believe me, I started looking. That red tape notebook I found sitting half-buried under his paperwork wasn't just some list of vendors. It was a damn blueprint, a trail of names and payment codes and obscure account numbers, most of which didn't match anything our department was supposed to be involved with. That little spiral-bound pad was full of handwritten notes, scribbled abbreviations, strange little notations beside certain names like bonus, alternate invoice, or talk to Kurt first. I didn't jump to conclusions, not right away. I've seen people ruin their own credibility by rushing to make accusations without proof, and I wasn't about to hand Rick the satisfaction of watching me stumble in a hurry. So I did what I've always done best. I watched, I listened, and I started collecting the pieces one by one. It was almost laughable how sloppy he'd gotten, how casual he was in assuming no one would ever question his actions. That's the thing about being invisible in a workplace like ours. When people stop noticing you, they also stop being careful around you. Rick was always going on about vendor relationships, always disappearing into closed-door meetings that weren't on any official calendar. He'd come back from lunch with folders tucked under his arm, files that never made it into our shared system, invoices that showed up days later with vague descriptions like consulting support or external logistics assistance. I started digging quietly, matching those invoice numbers to actual payments in the financial system, pulling copies of receipts when I could find them, highlighting inconsistencies in the amounts, dates, and purposes. And with every document I pieced together, it became clearer. Rick wasn't just playing office politics anymore. He was running something on the side, something shady, something that reeked of kickbacks and under-the-table favors. I wasn't alone in noticing that things didn't always add up, but most people didn't want to see it. Either they were too comfortable in their routines or too afraid to rock the boat. But Marcus, he was different. Not a close friend, not someone I'd trust with everything, but sharp enough to notice patterns and loose-lipped enough to say too much when he thought no one important was listening. One afternoon, while we were both in the copy room waiting for the printer to churn out a massive set of quarterly reports, Marcus casually said, "You ever notice how Rick's travel expenses always come back inflated? I swear that guy could fly to Tulsa and make it look like a 5-star retreat in Maui." I played it cool, laughed just enough to keep the conversation light, but my mind was already racing. I went back and started pulling his expense reports from the last 6 months. Sure enough, there were meals billed in cities he supposedly hadn't traveled to, car rental charges overlapping with rideshare receipts, even a couple hotel charges from weekends that didn't align with any scheduled business trips. And it wasn't just one or two mistakes, it was a pattern, a deliberate layering of falsified data dressed up just enough to slide past the basic checks in the system. Still, I needed more. I couldn't bring this to anyone without something solid, something undeniable, something that could hold up against the inevitable spin Rick would throw at it. So I started documenting everything, quietly saving files to a secure folder on my personal drive, making notes about dates, transaction numbers, vendor codes. I even started photographing the paper invoices he carelessly left on his desk when he went to lunch, snapping them with my phone under my desk and emailing them to myself under generic file names so no one would raise a brow. I never left fingerprints, never left a trace. I erased my browser history, encrypted my files, double-checked every time I printed anything. I became a ghost in my own office, present, polite, but never obvious. And all the while, Rick kept grinning, kept strutting through the halls like he owned the place, completely unaware that the same woman he'd humiliated over a pair of tickets was building a slow, meticulous case against him. Not a personal vendetta, not an emotional outburst, but a precise unraveling of everything he thought made him untouchable. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Another empty office afternoon, another careless mistake on his part. Rick had left early for a supposed off-site vendor strategy session, which I already suspected was code for a golf day on the company dime. I was restocking printer paper in the supply closet when I realized I'd left my badge in his office. At least, that's what I told myself. Truth was, I wanted another look at that red-taped notebook. I wanted to know if there was anything else he was hiding. I stepped inside, calm as ever, scanning the desk quickly. The notebook was there, but what caught my eye was the drawer he'd left slightly open, the one he usually kept locked. Inside, there wasn't much: a few pens, a stress ball shaped like a globe, a folded business card from some consulting firm I'd never heard of. But underneath that, wedged between two stapled contracts, was a small black USB drive. It had no company logo, no markings except a white sticker on one side with one word written in all caps: Alt Files. I stared at it for a few seconds, fingers hovering just above it, heart pounding in my throat like a war drum. And then, without even fully knowing why, I slipped it into my purse. I didn't know what was on that drive. Not yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Rick had just handed me the match. Now it was only a matter of time before I lit the fuse. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing exactly how to dismantle something piece by piece, quietly and deliberately, with no need for shouting or dramatic confrontations. Just a methodical unraveling that feels like watching a perfectly tied knot loosen with every calculated tug. That's what I was doing now, day by day, hour by hour, building my case against Rick with the patience of a surgeon and the precision of a chess player 3 moves ahead. He still strutted through the halls like he had nothing to worry about, completely unaware that every coffee break, every offhand comment, every sloppy spreadsheet was another thread I was pulling from the frayed edges of his carefully crafted image. After finding the USB drive labeled Alt Files, I knew there was no turning back. I waited until I was alone at home, doors locked, blinds drawn, the house quiet except for the soft hum of my laptop. I plugged it in slowly, half expecting it to be encrypted or corrupted, but what I found was worse because it was all so mundane, so obvious, so insultingly amateur. Folder after folder of financial documents, alternative versions of vendor contracts, duplicate invoice templates, expense reports with side-by-side, adjusted versions, one version for internal submission, one for whatever shady dealings Rick was running behind the scenes. There were even PDFs marked Final for compliance that had been edited just days before submission, with subtle but critical changes to numbers, payee names, and cost codes. I started documenting everything, compiling a timeline that linked Rick's actions to specific payments and discrepancies. I cross-referenced vendor names from the red-tape notebook with entries in the drive and compared them against the master vendor list in our system. It was like building a jigsaw puzzle where every piece came with its own little bombshell. I used my own laptop, never the company one, kept backup copies on encrypted USBs, and labeled them like old recipe files just in case anyone ever stumbled across them. My fingerprints were nowhere near the mess I was exposing, and I intended to keep it that way. But I also knew I couldn't pull this off alone. I needed someone inside the system, someone with just enough access to confirm my suspicions without raising red flags. That's when I started quietly reaching out to Tasha in human resources. Now, Tasha wasn't the kind of woman you noticed right away. She kept her head down, did her job well, and didn't involve herself in office politics. But she had a sharp mind and a low tolerance for bullshit, and over the years, I'd seen flashes of steel behind her polite smiles that told me she wasn't someone to underestimate. I didn't tell her everything at first, just enough to get her attention. I started by asking a few innocent questions about expense audit protocols, made a few comments about discrepancies in the invoice process, then casually mentioned how strange it was that Rick's vendor files never seemed to match the quarterly reports. I watched her eyes narrow slightly, just for a second, and I knew she'd caught the scent of something rotten. A few days later, I sent an anonymous tip to the internal compliance inbox, nothing too explicit, just a nudge toward the right files, a mention of irregularities, a breadcrumb trail that led straight to Rick's office without ever mentioning my name. I knew how these systems worked: slow, bureaucratic, methodical, but I also knew that once something was logged, it had to be investigated, no matter how deeply anyone wanted to bury it. Still, I wasn't done. I wanted Rick to walk right into the storm with that same smug grin he always wore, completely unaware that his entire foundation was about to collapse. So I set the final trap, a little detail that no one could ignore. I used Rick's own arrogance against him, scheduling a Monday morning, all-hands meeting in his name. I sent the invite from his assistant's account, used his usual tone in the message, included the VP of Finance and 2 compliance officers in the CC list, and titled it just vaguely enough to pass as routine. Quarterly Vendor Review and Strategic Initiatives. I knew he wouldn't even notice it until Sunday night, if at all. He'd be too busy bragging to his buddies, yelling at the TV, stuffing himself with wings and beer while he basked in the spotlight he'd stolen from me. But I wasn't watching the game that night. I was watching something else entirely, watching files upload, watching automated emails send, watching the clock tick toward the moment everything I'd prepared would collide in one carefully constructed explosion of truth. By Sunday night, while Rick was yelling at the screen during the Super Bowl, I was uploading something far more explosive than a halftime show. There's a unique kind of silence in an office just before a storm hits, the kind that feels thick in the air, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. That Monday morning, everything looked normal on the surface, coffee brewing in the kitchenette, printers spitting out reports, voices murmuring from cubicles. But underneath all that surface-level hum was a tension you could practically taste. I walked in early, earlier than usual, and settled into my desk like it was any other day. No one suspected anything. No one knew that before the clock even hit 9, the floor would shift beneath their feet and the kingdom Rick built out of lies and bravado would begin to crack open like a rotting foundation under polished tile. At 8:58, the first email hit inboxes like a firecracker. Subject: Vendor Review and Strategic Initiatives Meeting. Everyone glanced at their screens, puzzled, some raising eyebrows, others shrugging. Rick hadn't mentioned any meeting in last week's planning session, and for a man who liked to boast about his every move, a surprise meeting wasn't just unusual, it was suspicious. But the invite looked legitimate, even used his preferred formatting, so no one questioned it. I could already hear a few whispers floating through the hallway. Did you know about this? Is this something big? Why are the compliance officers coming? Rick strolled in at 9:03, looking smug and relaxed, probably still basking in whatever leftover glory he thought had earned by hijacking my Super Bowl tickets. His face was slightly red from sun exposure, his gait just a little too casual, like he thought he had all the time in the world. I watched from my desk as he noticed the meeting alert on his phone. He paused in the middle of the hallway, eyes narrowing, and for a moment I wondered if he'd sensed something off. But then he did what Rick always did. He shrugged, assumed it was someone else's problem, and sauntered toward the conference room like he was about to give another one of his rehearsed speeches about synergy and fiscal foresight. The moment he opened that conference room door, everything shifted. The VP of Finance was already seated, along with 2 representatives from Compliance and Internal Audit, and Tasha, cool, calm, collected, sat at the far end of the table, a thick folder in front of her labeled with his name in bold print. Rick's smile faltered just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I saw it. I saw the flicker of confusion, the faint crease in his forehead as he scanned the room and realized he wasn't there to lead the meeting, he was the subject of it. I stayed at my desk but angled myself toward the glass walls, pretending to type while keeping my eyes fixed on every movement inside. It didn't take long for the mood to shift from tense to downright hostile. The VP of Finance began by listing inconsistencies flagged in recent audits, and Rick tried to laugh it off, throwing out weak excuses about clerical errors and outdated vendor databases. Then Compliance stepped in, presenting anonymized reports highlighting the discrepancies I'd so carefully documented over the past few weeks: duplicate payments, inflated expenses, shell vendor names. I watched him start to sweat, literally, a faint sheen forming on his forehead as he shifted in his chair, trying to regain his composure. Tasha didn't say much at first. She just sat there flipping through the pages of that thick folder like she was biding her time. But when she finally spoke, she didn't hold back. She laid out the audit timeline, quoted specific invoice numbers, highlighted suspicious payments tied to his travel expenses, and then, with surgical precision, she slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. I couldn't see what it was from where I sat, but I didn't need to. It was the summary page of the compliance report I'd anonymously triggered, the same one that referenced irregular activity connected to senior-level approval processes. His signature was all over those documents, every one of them tying him directly to the fraud. Rick tried to bluster his way through it, raising his voice, calling it a misunderstanding, even accusing the audit team of targeting him unfairly. But his words had lost their weight. No one was nodding. No one was laughing at his weak jokes anymore. The room had turned on him, and he could feel it. That old smirk he always wore, the one that made me want to slam a filing cabinet drawer shut on his fingers, was gone now. What replaced it was something far more satisfying: panic. People started coming out of their offices, catching whispers of what was going on. Phones stopped ringing, conversations froze mid-sentence, and slowly, the whole floor fell into a stunned, curious silence. I kept typing, or at least pretending to, because I knew better than to gawk, but I could feel every eye turning toward that conference room. A few minutes later, Rick came storming out, his face pale, jaw clenched, walking fast with Tasha trailing calmly behind him. No yelling, no dramatic exit, just a quiet, humiliating march back to his office, where he slammed the door hard enough to rattle the blinds. Word spread like wildfire. Within an hour, the entire department knew something had gone terribly wrong. By lunch, the official email had been sent out. Rick Hendricks, VP of Sales, suspended pending internal investigation related to financial misconduct. The phrasing was clinical, polite, cold, and it carried the kind of finality that made people whisper behind their coffee cups and stare at each other in disbelief. Some people looked genuinely shocked. Others, like Marcus, just raised their eyebrows and muttered, "Well, damn." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, quietly organizing my folders, keeping my face still while my heart drummed in my chest. Because this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Rick was down, sure. But I hadn't come this far to just knock him off his throne. I was going to burn the whole throne room down. It's a strange thing, the way silence lingers after chaos, how the noise of everything collapsing fades so quickly while the weight of what remains sits heavy in your chest long after the dust has settled. I thought I'd feel triumphant, thought I'd walk into that office on Monday afternoon with my head held high and some kind of righteous fire burning in my gut. But instead, I felt still, quiet, detached, almost hollow in a way that surprised me. It wasn't regret, exactly, and it sure as hell wasn't guilt. It was just the absence of all that tension I'd carried for so long, like a storm that finally passed and left the sky too quiet to trust. Rick's office sat empty for the rest of the week, door locked, lights off, blinds drawn tight like no one wanted to touch what had been left behind. His nameplate disappeared first. Someone removed it without ceremony, just an intern from facilities doing her job. Then came the boxes, packed quietly by someone from HR, carried out without so much as a whisper. No speeches, no goodbyes, not even a fake thank you card passed around the break room. Just absence. Just silence. Just the sharp reminder that a man who once thought he was untouchable had been erased so cleanly, it was like he'd never mattered at all. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I didn't explain, didn't justify, didn't answer the lingering stares from coworkers who now looked at me differently, like they suspected I'd had something to do with it, but couldn't prove a thing. I kept to myself, finished my tasks, nodded politely in meetings, and avoided the break room gossip with surgical precision. People whispered, of course they did, because offices like ours run on rumors more than they run on policy. But no one said anything directly, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Then HR called me and Tasha, sitting behind a desk that somehow felt smaller now, like it couldn't quite contain the weight of what she was about to offer. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We'd like to offer you the role," she said simply, her fingers folded on top of a printed offer letter, salary and title laid out in neat, confident font. "Interim, for now. But you're the most qualified person for it, Dana. You've always been. And maybe that was the moment I should have felt vindicated, should have smiled and nodded and accepted what I'd earned, finally earned, after years of being passed over and ignored and shoved to the sidelines. But instead, I just stared at that paper, that ink, that offer I'd dreamed of once upon a time when I still believed that hard work was enough. I didn't say yes right away. I didn't say anything at all for a long moment. Because somewhere deep in my chest, there was still that cold whisper reminding me this wasn't how I wanted it. This wasn't victory. It was just a vacancy filled by someone who knew where the bones were buried. Marcus caught me in the hallway later that day, offered me a half smile and a light pat on the back like we were suddenly allies in some silent war. "Congrats, Dana," he said, voice low and amused. "You earned it." "Hell, you probably earned it 5 years ago." I nodded, muttered something vague in return, but I didn't celebrate. I didn't pop champagne or take myself out to dinner or even tell anyone outside the office. It didn't feel like something worth celebrating. It felt like cleanup, like I was the one left behind to sweep up the pieces of a mess I hadn't started but had damn well finished. And then, 2 days later, came the voicemail. I almost didn't listen to it, saw his name flash on my screen and nearly deleted it without a second thought. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed play, standing in my kitchen with the lights off, one hand gripping the counter as Rick's voice, tired and shaky, filled the room. He didn't sound like the man I'd worked under for years. He sounded smaller, unsure, like a man trying to claw his way out of something far bigger than he understood. "I don't know if you'll ever listen to this," he began, his voice slower than I remembered, the usual cockiness stripped away like someone had scraped it off his bones. "I know you probably hate me. Maybe you should. I don't know what I was thinking. I let a lot of things get away from me. I guess I thought it would never catch up. I guess I thought I was better than I was. I don't even know why I'm calling. Maybe just to say I'm sorry, not just about the tickets, but all of it." He paused then, and I could hear the faint rustling of fabric, like he was shifting nervously wherever he was. "Anyway, I hope you're okay. I hope they treat you better than they treated me. You deserved more than I gave you." Then silence. I didn't save the message. I didn't call back. I didn't even let myself feel anything except a dull, echoing emptiness that left me staring at the floor long after his voice had vanished from the room. I didn't want his apology, not really. It wasn't for me. It was for him, a man trying to find peace in a story where he no longer controlled the ending. The next morning, I walked into what used to be his office, now mine. The desk was too clean, too unfamiliar, the air still carrying that faint scent of leather and printer toner that hadn't faded yet. I sat down in his old chair, leaned back slowly, looked out the same window he used to gaze through like he owned the skyline. Then I reached over and did something simple, something small but deliberate. I left the office door open behind me. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't feel like a victory. It just feels quiet. But it's the quiet that follows an explosion, the kind that makes people stop and look around, wondering what they missed while the ground shifted beneath them. The kind that lingers long after the dust has settled. Do you think I went too far? Or not far enough?